My sister insisted I watch her 4 kids on New Year's Eve while she enjoyed a vacation I was funding. My parents backed her without hesitation, so I canceled every booking, every ticket, every hotel. The fallout was instant, and watching them lose it was almost worth the silence that followed. I am a 32-year-old woman, a senior financial analyst navigating the bustling corporate landscape of Minneapolis. For 8 years, I've meticulously climbed the ladder, starting from an entry-level position, diligently constructing a life I am profoundly proud of. My modest condo is a sanctuary, my car reliably ferries me through the city, and my savings account, carefully nurtured since college graduation, offers a comforting sense of security. My sister, Danielle, is 36, and her life, by contrast, unfolds on a dramatically different stage. She married Marcus Reed, her high school sweetheart, at 23, and together they've created a vibrant, often chaotic, family of 4 children. Ethan, the eldest, just celebrated his 12th birthday, followed by Olivia, 10, and the energetic 7-year-old twins, Jackson and Harper. Danielle, it must be said, was always the golden child. Growing up, her beauty, her popularity, her effortless charm meant she basked in the warmth of our parents' beaming pride at every school event, every family gathering. I was the quiet one, the bookish girl who found solace in pages rather than parties. My grades were impeccable, my efforts earnest, but I never quite managed to gleam with the same radiant light as Danielle. Our mother, Connie, never bothered to veil her blatant favoritism, and our father, Harold, simply drifted along, a placid current in the wake of her preferences, anything to preserve a fragile peace. This insidious dynamic, a silent, pervasive force, has shaped every significant moment of my adult life, leaving scars I've spent years in therapy laboring to unravel. The unspoken tradition of me funding our family vacations began roughly 5 years ago, though, if I'm brutally honest, the groundwork for this expectation was laid long before. Danielle and Marcus, perpetually teetering on the edge of financial stability, found themselves in a particularly rough patch. Marcus, a sales representative for a medical equipment company, saw his income swing wildly, a slave to the capricious whims of commissions. Danielle worked part-time as a dental receptionist, primarily for the elusive promise of insurance benefits. When their finances truly plummeted, I offered to underwrite a family trip to Florida, a magical excursion to Disney World for the children. I envisioned it as a singular, heartfelt gesture of love and support. Instead, it transmuted into an unwavering expectation. Year after year, I found myself bankrolling increasingly elaborate family getaways, a sun-drenched cruise to the Bahamas, a week of exhilarating skiing in Colorado, a sprawling California road trip that ultimately siphoned nearly $9,000 from my carefully hoarded savings. Each time, I rationalized it, telling myself it was for the kids, for the indelible family memories, for the fleeting joy of seeing everyone happy. And each time, Danielle accepted my largesse with little more than a perfunctory nod, rarely a genuine thank you, while my parents showered her with accolades for being such a wonderful mother, their praise barely a whisper acknowledging my financial sacrifices. This year, however, I had meticulously orchestrated something truly special. My parents were nearing their 40th wedding anniversary, a milestone I yearned to celebrate in a deeply meaningful way. I spent months in painstaking research, finally unearthing a breathtaking resort nestled amidst the stunning red rock formations of Sedona, Arizona, renowned for its luxurious spa amenities. I booked 2 connecting suites, a thoughtful arrangement designed to accommodate everyone in comfort. The total cost, a staggering sum, eclipsed $12,000 for a 5-night stay, strategically spanning New Year's Eve and the initial days of January. I paid for everything up front, as the resort's policy mandated full payment for holiday bookings. What none of my family seemed to grasp, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the sheer volume of invisible labor these trips demanded. They saw only the polished final product, the glossy itineraries, the confirmed reservations. They never bore witness to the countless hours I dedicated to comparing prices, poring over reviews, meticulously coordinating schedules, and navigating the intricate labyrinth of logistics. For the Colorado skiing trip alone, I had invested 3 weeks researching ski schools capable of accommodating children of disparate ages and skill levels. I'd called the resort multiple times, ensuring they possessed appropriate equipment rentals for even the youngest, a 4-year-old. I'd arranged airport transportation, secured coveted dinner reservations at restaurants with kid-friendly menus, and even bulk purchased hand warmers, a precautionary measure against the inevitable complaints of cold fingers on the slopes. All of this invisible labor was simply presumed. When things unfolded flawlessly, it was merely the natural order of the universe. When something inevitably went awry, like the time Ethan succumbed to food poisoning after a meal at a seafood restaurant I'd selected, I, despite having no dominion over kitchen hygiene standards, was forced to bear the brunt of the blame. My best friend, Melanie, once confronted me, her voice laced with bewilderment. "Why do you keep doing this?" We were at our usual lunch spot, a cozy cafe near her office, and I was mid-rant about the recently concluded California road trip, its demands still echoing in my ears. I remember staring blankly at my salad, genuinely struggling to articulate an answer. The best I could muster was a halting confession. I wanted to feel like I belonged, like an intrinsic, valued part of the family. Melanie's gaze, profound in its sadness, silenced me, forcing me to hastily change the subject. The Sedona trip, however, felt different. It wasn't merely another vacation I was funding out of a twisted cocktail of guilt and obligation. My parents' 40th anniversary genuinely resonated with me, and I yearned to craft an indelible memory for them. I spent nearly 2 months meticulously researching destinations before finally settling on Arizona. I devoured travel blogs, watched countless YouTube videos showcasing the resort's magnificent property, and even joined an online forum dedicated to Sedona visitors, ravenously seeking insider tips. This meticulous attention to detail felt less like an obligation and more like an act of genuine love, a crucial distinction for my weary soul. I unveiled the trip at Thanksgiving. We were all gathered at my parents' house, and I'd meticulously prepared a little presentation, vibrant photos of the resort, enticing descriptions of the spa services, the rugged hiking trails, all the myriad activities tailored for the children. I watched my mother's face ignite with pure delight as I described the anniversary dinner I'd arranged at the resort's fine dining restaurant. My father, to my profound surprise and joy, actually teared up a little, a gesture that spoke volumes. The children were beside themselves with excitement over the pool and the junior ranger programs. Even Marcus, usually reserved, seemed genuinely pleased. Danielle's reaction, however, was more subdued. I dismissed it, attributing it to the overwhelming chaos of the holiday season. She offered a brief, almost dismissive, thank you before deftly redirecting the conversation to Ethan's recent basketball game. Don't read into it, I told myself, a familiar litany of self-soothing. Don't let your insecurities spoil what should be a happy moment. The real trouble, the kind that unravels carefully constructed plans, began 2 weeks before our departure. Though, in hindsight, I can pinpoint smaller, insidious warning signs I had consciously chosen to ignore. A few days after Thanksgiving, Danielle had posted on social media about her desperate need for a break from mommy duties. Her friends, a chorus of digital sympathy, had flooded the comments with suggestions for self-care. I'd scrolled past, dismissing it as typical social media venting. Then, Marcus had made an offhand comment during a family group text, musing about how nice it would be to have some adult time during the trip. I'd replied with a breezy smiley emoji, assuming he meant evening dinners after the kids were tucked into bed. The first true tremor of impending conflict arrived when my mother, almost casually, mentioned Danielle had been researching upscale restaurants in Sedona. This was during an unrelated phone call, and my mother had dropped the information as if it were utterly innocuous. When I probed, asking why Danielle was researching restaurants when I'd already painstakingly arranged all our dining plans, my mother had merely chuckled, vaguely mumbling something about Danielle wanting options. I should have pressed harder. I should have unleashed a barrage of questions, demanded an unequivocal clarification of Danielle's clandestine plans. Instead, I succumbed to my usual pattern with my family. I assumed the best, naively hoping any potential conflict would magically dissipate on its own. Danielle called me on a Tuesday evening, just as I was wrapping up a stack of work reports. Her voice possessed that particular, unmistakable tone I'd grown to recognize over the years, the one that signaled she desired something and, more importantly, expected me to provide it. She launched into a carefully constructed explanation. She and Marcus had been discussing the trip, and they felt it would be the perfect opportunity for some much-needed alone time. They yearned to ring in the new year as a couple, just the two of them, unfettered by the delightful chaos of 4 children. They had even discovered a fancy restaurant in Sedona, one offering a special New Year's Eve tasting menu, and they were determined to transform it into a truly romantic date night. "That sounds lovely," I managed, a flicker of unease already stirring within me. "But what's your plan for the kids?" And then, she dropped the bombshell. She wanted me to babysit all 4 children on New Year's Eve so she and Marcus could revel in their romantic dinner. Not just for a few fleeting hours, mind you, but for the entire evening and night. They intended to book a separate hotel room elsewhere, ensuring their privacy, which meant I would be solely responsible for the children from late afternoon until the following morning. I sat there, utterly stunned, trying desperately to process the audacity of her request. I, who had paid over $12,000 for this elaborate trip. I, who had meticulously planned special activities for myself, including a sunset meditation session on New Year's Eve, an oasis of calm I'd been eagerly anticipating for months. The resort boasted a gorgeous outdoor gathering space where they hosted a champagne toast at midnight, and I had envisioned myself standing there, bathed in the soft glow of the Arizona stars, a sense of quiet hope for the year ahead blossoming within me. Instead, my sister expected me to spend New Year's Eve wrangling her 4 children while she and her husband reveled in a romantic evening, all on my dime. I finally managed. "I need to think about it." She immediately bristled, her voice sharp with defensiveness. She reminded me, pointedly, that I didn't have children, that I couldn't possibly comprehend the bone-deep exhaustion of parenting, that she and Marcus were in desperate need of this precious time together. She then twisted the knife, reminding me that I was single, that I had no romantic plans anyway. "So," she concluded, with a dismissive shrug in her tone, "what difference does it make how you spend New Year's Eve?" That comment stung, a visceral ache far more potent than I cared to admit. I had been single for 3 years, not because I was unlovable or unworthy, but because I had consciously chosen to focus on myself, on my healing. My last relationship had ended in a painful wreckage, and I had been intentional about not rushing into something new merely to fill a void. Danielle knew this. She had weaponized it against me before, those subtle, insidious jabs about my empty condo and my solo vacations, always delivered with a saccharine, pitying smile that made me want to scream. What made the comment even more excruciating was the unspoken, towering assumption beneath it. In Danielle's narrow worldview, my life possessed demonstrably less value because I lacked a husband or children. My career accomplishments, my cherished friendships, my hard-won personal growth, none of that registered as meaningful. I existed, in her perception, primarily as a resource, an instrument to be utilized by those whose lives, presumably, mattered more. My mind drifted to all the New Year's Eves I had spent with my family over the years. The midnight toasts where I stood slightly apart from the coupled embraces. The way my mother would squeeze Harold's hand, her gaze full of warmth for Danielle and Marcus, barely sparing a glance for me. The children's bedtimes that inevitably seemed to derail any nascent plans I might have harbored for myself. Year after year, I had shown up, participated, and valiantly tried to unearth joy in their celebrations, while my own desires quietly faded into the background. For once, I had dared to imagine something different. The sunset meditation session at the resort had seemed a perfect, poignant way to bid farewell to a challenging year. I had pictured myself enveloped by the majesty of the red rocks, the sky ablaze with orange and pink, breathing deeply, setting intentions for the months ahead. The champagne toast at midnight had represented a small, defiant act of self-celebration, a chance to honor my own journey amidst the family festivities. And now, Danielle wanted me to trade all of that for diapers and bedtime negotiations, for the particular brand of delightful chaos that 4 children under 13 could effortlessly generate. "I need time to consider your request," I reiterated, my voice surprisingly steady, and then I ended the call. The next morning, I woke to a text from my mother, a summons to call her. When I did, she immediately launched into a full-blown lecture on family obligations and the sacrosanct bonds of sisterly love. Danielle, I realized with a fresh wave of dread, had already reached her, skillfully framing the situation as me being selfish, utterly unwilling to help. My mother reminded me, with a distinct tone of judgment, that Danielle had 4 children to raise, while I, bless my solitary heart, had the luxurious privilege of only worrying about myself. She declared that sometimes family demanded sacrifice, and she fervently hoped I would do the right thing. I paused, then posed a question that seemed utterly logical to me. "Mother, since you and Father will also be on the trip, would you be willing to watch the kids instead?" She laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound, as if I'd uttered the most absurd joke imaginable. She explained, with a tone of long-suffering entitlement, that she and Harold planned to fully indulge in the resort's amenities themselves, that they had earned this relaxation after 40 years of marriage and raising 2 demanding daughters. She concluded it simply wouldn't be fair to ask them to babysit when I was the one without responsibilities. "I am the one paying for the entire trip," I pointed out, my voice dangerously low. My mother went quiet for a moment, then, with a huff of indignation, informed me that bringing up money was tacky and hurtful. She claimed she had raised me better than that, and expressed profound disappointment in my attitude. She ended the call with a chilling pronouncement. She hoped I would come to my senses before the trip. I spent the next several days feeling as if my sanity was fraying at the edges. I confided in Melanie, my steadfast best friend, who had been my rock through years of family drama. She was appalled by the sheer audacity of the situation and vehemently encouraged me to stand my ground. We met for coffee the day after my mother's call, and Melanie listened, her jaw practically resting on the table, as I recounted the entire saga. She then articulated something I hadn't quite been able to grasp myself. The request wasn't merely about babysitting. It was a stark, brutal reflection of my family's fundamental perception of my place in their rigid hierarchy. To them, my time, my money, my emotional energy existed solely to serve their needs. The audacious notion that I might harbor my own desires for New Year's Eve hadn't even registered in Danielle's mind. She had simply assumed I would be available, because I was always available. Melanie also underscored the financial absurdity of the entire situation. I was outlaying over $12,000 for a family vacation, and my reward for this exorbitant generosity was to spend the most anticipated night of the trip alone with 4 children, while everyone else celebrated. It felt akin to buying someone an expensive car, only to be told I had to walk everywhere while they drove. I also consulted my therapist, Dr. Okonkwo, who, after 2 years of patiently listening to countless stories of my family dynamics, helped me dissect the manipulation tactics my family was employing. During our session, she asked me to envision what I would advise a friend trapped in the same predicament. The answer resonated instantly, clear and undeniable. I would tell her to stand up for herself, to unequivocally refuse to be treated like the hired help. Dr. Okonkwo then introduced a concept that utterly shattered and resculpted my perspective: the cycle of overfunctioning. She urged me to consider whether my relentless helpfulness was, in fact, enabling my family's deeply ingrained dysfunction. By consistently stepping in to smooth over every ripple, to cater to everyone's needs, I was inadvertently preventing them from developing their own coping mechanisms and problem-solving skills. My generosity, however well-intentioned, had morphed into a debilitating crutch, allowing them to remain perpetually dependent and entitled. I journaled exhaustively during those days, filling pages with my raw, unfiltered emotions. I embarked on long, punishing runs through my neighborhood, the biting December cold invigorating my cheeks as I desperately tried to outpace my racing thoughts. I did everything in my power to process the turbulent maelstrom of my emotions and strategize my next move. A week before the scheduled trip, my father called me. This was highly unusual. Harold rarely inserted himself into family conflicts. His preference was to remain neutral, which, in practice, meant he tacitly enabled whatever Connie and Danielle decreed. But this time, he reached out directly. He began by effusively describing how much the trip meant to him and my mother, how profoundly touched they were that I had planned something so special for their anniversary. A flicker of warmth, a foolish hope, surged within me, momentarily believing he might finally be calling to offer his support. Then he pivoted. He acknowledged that watching the kids on New Year's Eve wasn't ideal, but he implored me to consider it a gift to the family. He framed it, preposterously, as me helping to salvage Danielle's marriage, as if their relationship was somehow my direct responsibility. He even mentioned, with a carefully modulated tone, that Marcus and Danielle had been experiencing some tension lately, and that a romantic evening might be precisely what they needed to reconnect. "Father," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "why is Danielle's marriage more important than my enjoyment of a trip I am entirely funding?" He sighed heavily, a theatrical exhalation of exasperation, and accused me of being difficult. He declared that money wasn't everything, and that family should always come first. He concluded by expressing his earnest hope that I would remember what really mattered. I ended the call feeling utterly hollow, utterly exhausted. I spent the remainder of the evening staring at my living room wall, endlessly replaying scenarios in my head. I pictured myself caving to their demands, spending New Year's Eve surrounded by children while everyone else celebrated. I imagined the corrosive resentment festering within me for months afterward. I envisioned next year, when they would inevitably expect a similar sacrifice, and the year after that, an endless, soul-crushing cycle of my generosity being ruthlessly exploited. That night, sleep was an elusive stranger. I lay in bed, watching shadows dance across my ceiling, my mind relentlessly replaying every family vacation I had ever funded. I recalled the cruise where Danielle had complained incessantly about her cabin being too small, despite the fact that I had upgraded everyone at significant personal expense. I remembered the ski trip where my mother had disdainfully criticized the resort's breakfast buffet, declaring she expected better quality, given what she assumed I was paying. I remembered the California road trip where Marcus had grumbled about the rental car not being spacious enough, as if he had conveniently forgotten he hadn't contributed a single dollar to the vehicle rental. In all those years of underwriting lavish vacations, never once had anyone bothered to ask what I wanted to do. The itineraries invariably revolved around the children's fleeting interests, or my parents' often whimsical preferences. If I dared to suggest an activity, like visiting a museum in San Diego during our California trip, I was met with audible sighs and complaints about how boring it would be. My desires were consistently outvoted, or, more often, simply dismissed, and I had long since learned to simply cease voicing them. Lying there in the suffocating darkness, a fundamental, searing truth about my role in the family began to crystallize. I wasn't a full participant in these vacations. I was a sponsor. My sole function was to provide the resources and manage the logistics, while everyone else uninhibitedly luxuriated in the experience. Asking me to babysit on New Year's Eve wasn't an anomaly. It was a perfectly logical extension of how I had always been treated. 3 days before the trip, Danielle sent me a lengthy text message. She thanked me for agreeing to watch the kids, and then meticulously outlined her plans for the evening. She detailed what time she and Marcus would be departing, what the children's bedtimes were, which restaurants delivered to the resort if I needed to order dinner. I hadn't agreed to anything. I stared at that message for a full 10 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs. She had interpreted my silence as consent. Or perhaps she had known all along that I would eventually cave, because I always did. I was the reliable one, the accommodating one, the sister who bent over backward to maintain a fragile peace while everyone else took and took and took. Something shifted inside me in that moment. It was subtle at first, like a microscopic crack forming in an ancient dam. Then, the pressure built and built, a relentless, escalating force, until everything inside me finally, irrevocably broke loose. I didn't respond to Danielle's text. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the resort in Sedona. I explained, my voice surprisingly steady, that I needed to cancel my reservation. The woman on the phone, her voice laced with practiced sympathy, looked up my booking. She informed me that because I was canceling within 72 hours of the check-in date, I would forfeit my entire payment, as per the resort's strict policy. $12,000 gone. I didn't hesitate. I confirmed the cancellation. After ending that call, I sank onto my living room sofa and cried, not from regret, but from an overwhelming, soul-deep relief. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. I had unequivocally refused to participate in a system that treated my generosity as an obligation and my feelings as utterly irrelevant. The sheer physical sensation of relief surprised me with its intensity. My shoulders, perpetually hunched near my ears, finally dropped. My jaw, perpetually clenched, relaxed. The persistent headache that had plagued me for the past week dissolved within minutes of confirming the cancellation. My body, I realized, had been holding a titanic burden of tension, a burden I hadn't even fully recognized until it suddenly, gloriously, released. I walked through my condo, my sanctuary, touching familiar objects as if seeing them for the very first time. The framed photograph of me at my college graduation, standing alone because my parents had left early to attend one of Danielle's events. The exquisite ceramic vase I had bought myself after my first promotion, a small, solitary celebration that no one in my family had bothered to acknowledge. The bookshelf overflowing with novels I cherished, titles Danielle had always dismissively branded as pretentious or boring. Every corner of my home, every object, represented choices I had made for myself. And yet I had been prepared to surrender my autonomy the moment my family demanded it. I contemplated calling Melanie, eager to share my radical act of defiance, but I wasn't ready to speak yet. The decision felt too raw, too seismic to articulate before I had fully processed its profound implications myself. Instead, I brewed a cup of soothing tea and settled by my window, watching the city lights begin to flicker in the early evening darkness. I composed a group text to my parents and Danielle. I kept it brutally simple, unequivocally factual. I have cancelled the Sedona trip and will not be providing any further explanation. I wished them all a happy new year and politely asked them to respect my decision. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, I turned off my phone. I left it off for 3 days. During those 3 days, I engaged in acts of self-care I had deferred for years. I deep-cleaned my condo, not because it was truly dirty, but because the physical act of clearing out clutter felt profoundly therapeutic. I donated 3 bulging bags of clothes to a local shelter, including several items I had kept solely because Danielle had given them to me as regifted cast-offs. I cooked elaborate meals, just for myself, dishes I had always yearned to try but never made because they seemed like too much effort for one person. A complex mushroom risotto that demanded constant, patient stirring. Homemade pasta adorned with a slow-simmered bolognese. A chocolate soufflé that, despite collapsing slightly, tasted like pure heaven. I watched movies I loved, unburdened by anyone else's preferences. I binged an entire limited series Danielle had once scoffed at as melodramatic. I indulged in long, luxurious baths, dissolving expensive bath bombs I had been hoarding for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. I slept in as late as I desired, waking without the jarring intrusion of an alarm for the first time in months. Melanie called on the second day, her voice tinged with worry because I hadn't responded to her frantic messages. I finally answered, and poured out everything. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then, she dissolved into laughter, a full-bodied sound of pure, unadulterated delight, declaring she'd never been prouder of anyone in her entire life. She offered to come over and celebrate with me, but I gently told her I needed the solitude. She understood. During those quiet, introspective days, I found myself grappling with an unexpected wave of grief. The grief surprised me because I had anticipated only relief, perhaps a flicker of anxiety about the inevitable consequences of my decision. Instead, I mourned the idealized family I had always desperately wanted and never quite possessed. I cried for the little girl who had tried so relentlessly to earn her parents' approval, and for the young woman who had foolishly believed that generosity could purchase genuine love. I grieved the potential relationship I might have shared with Danielle if circumstances had been different, if our mother hadn't relentlessly pitted us against each other, if I hadn't always been cast as a mere supporting character in my sister's grand narrative. The grief, surprisingly, felt cleansing rather than destructive. It was the profound sadness of finally accepting a harsh reality after years of clinging to the deluded hope that things would somehow change. My family, I realized, would probably never give me what I so desperately craved. That stark recognition hurt deeply, but it also liberated me from the exhausting, futile effort of trying to earn something that should have been given unconditionally. On New Year's Eve, as the clock struck midnight, I poured myself a glass of champagne and toasted to my own burgeoning courage. I watched the televised fireworks, their brilliant explosions mirroring a sense of genuine hope blossoming within me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. When I finally reactivated my phone, I was greeted by a digital avalanche: 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and countless voicemails. The notifications loaded slowly, a cascading wall of increasingly frantic and furious communications. Danielle's texts, initially confused, quickly escalated to incandescent rage. She accused me of ruining her children's vacation, of destroying her marriage, of being the most selfish person she had ever known. She hurled names at me I won't repeat here. She demanded that I call her immediately and fix this situation. My mother's messages were variations on themes of disappointment and guilt. She couldn't fathom how I could do this to the family. She was heartbroken that I had chosen to wound everyone over something as trivial as babysitting. She questioned where she had gone wrong in raising me and asked how I could possibly be so cold. My father left a single voicemail, his voice tired and resigned. He stated he hoped I was proud of myself, and that this would take a long time to heal from. Marcus texted me directly, an unprecedented event. His message, surprisingly, was civil compared to the others. He acknowledged that the situation had gotten out of hand, and suggested that maybe we could talk when emotions had cooled down. I appreciated his measured tone, but I didn't respond. I also received several messages from relatives I rarely spoke to. Apparently, Danielle had broadcast her carefully curated version of events to the extended family, painting me as a monstrous figure who had cruelly snatched away a promised vacation mere days before its commencement. My Aunt Patricia, a woman I had always found utterly exhausting, sent me a long, rambling message about the sanctity of forgiveness and family bonds. My cousin Derek sent a brief, concerned text asking if I was okay, a solitary beacon of supportive communication from any relative. In the weeks following New Year's, the fallout continued to spread like a poisonous miasma. Danielle stopped speaking to me entirely. When I attempted to reach out a week into January, hoping for a calm, rational conversation, she blocked my number. She also blocked me on all social media platforms. I learned through my mother that Danielle had callously informed her children that I was no longer a part of their lives. Ethan, Olivia, Jackson, and Harper, children I had loved and spoiled for years, were now summarily cut off from their aunt because their mother couldn't tolerate not getting her way. My parents invited me to dinner in mid-January, under the flimsy guise of wanting to reconcile. I agreed because despite everything, I still loved them, and harbored a faint hope for a genuine conversation. Instead, I walked into a meticulously orchestrated ambush. My mother spent the first hour of dinner painstakingly detailing how profoundly the family had been wounded by my actions. She demanded that I apologize to Danielle, that I offer to pay for a makeup trip, essentially, that I grovel for forgiveness. Mother, I interjected, my patience finally snapping. Is anyone planning to acknowledge that I have been taken advantage of for years? She dismissed the question as dramatic, and declared that family help family without keeping score. She then pointed out, with an unsettling smugness, that someday I might need help, and wouldn't I want Danielle there for me? I reminded her, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, that Danielle had never once been there for me. When I endured a difficult breakup 3 years ago, Danielle hadn't called once. When I faced a terrifying cancer scare 2 years ago, which thankfully proved to be nothing, Danielle hadn't even bothered to send a text. My generosity had always flowed in one direction, a relentless, unreciprocated torrent, and any suggestion otherwise was a cruel fantasy. My father, sensing the escalating tension, tried to intervene at that point, suggesting we all take a breath. My mother, dissolving into theatrical tears, insisted I was rewriting history, to cast myself as the victim. The dinner ended with me leaving before dessert, my appetite long gone, my heart heavy with an all too familiar sorrow. A month later, an email from Marcus arrived. He apologized for how things had escalated and candidly admitted that the New Year's Eve request had been unreasonable. He revealed he'd been trying to persuade Danielle to reach out to me, but she remained firmly entrenched in her anger. He expressed a quiet hope that time would eventually soften things and added that, for what it was worth, he appreciated the trips I'd funded over the years, even if he'd never properly thanked me. I thanked Marcus for his email, but made it unequivocally clear that I would not be funding any more family vacations. I told him that my relationship with Danielle would necessitate significant, meaningful repair before I could even consider rejoining family events. He responded simply that he understood. Spring arrived, and with it, an unexpected, profound sense of peace. Without the constant, suffocating pressure of family expectations, I found myself breathing easier, a lightness I hadn't realized was absent. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I joined a pottery class and, to my surprise, discovered a nascent talent for wheel throwing. I began hiking on weekends, exploring hidden trails around Minnesota I never knew existed. I reconnected with cherished friends I had inadvertently neglected, too consumed by the ceaseless demands of managing family dynamics. Melanie threw me a small, impromptu celebration in March, 6 months before my 33rd birthday, simply because she wanted to acknowledge the transformative changes I had made. We gathered at her apartment with a few close friends, feasting on homemade pasta and savoring good wine. Someone, cautiously, inquired about my family, and for the first time, I could speak about the situation without feeling the imminent threat of tears or explosion. Dr. Okonkwo, during one of our sessions, told me that what I had done took tremendous courage. She explained that individuals who grow up in dysfunctional families often struggle their entire lives to break free from harmful, ingrained patterns. By canceling that trip, I had drawn a boundary that, she affirmed, should have been drawn years ago. The financial loss, she conceded, was significant, but the emotional freedom I had gained was, in her words, invaluable. Summer brought an unexpected, bittersweet contact from my nieces and nephews. Ethan, resourceful as ever, somehow found my email address and sent me a poignant message, asking why I didn't come around anymore. My heart fractured reading his innocent words. He was 12 years old, confused and heartbroken, unable to comprehend why his aunt had seemingly abandoned him. I wrote back carefully, pouring all my love into the words, assuring him that I loved him and his siblings very much, but that adult disagreements sometimes meant people needed space. I emphasized that none of this was his fault, and expressed my earnest hope that we could see each other again someday. Danielle, predictably, discovered the email exchange and sent me a blistering message through a new, unknown number. She accused me of attempting to turn her children against her and demanded that I never contact them again. I didn't respond, but I meticulously saved every message, a grim contingency in case I ever needed documentation of her escalating behavior. My parents made another attempt at reconciliation in August, this time through my Aunt Patricia, who called me claiming to be neutral. She suggested a family meeting, where everyone could air their grievances and work toward healing. I asked who was orchestrating this supposed meeting and learned, unsurprising, it was my mother. I then asked if Danielle had agreed to participate, and Patricia, caught off guard, admitted she wasn't sure. I politely declined the invitation, suggesting that any genuine reconciliation would first require an acknowledgement of how I had been treated, not another condescending lecture about my family obligations. As autumn embraced the city, I began to feel a profound, genuine contentment with my decision. The acute pain of losing my sister, and the complicated grief of estrangement from my parents, had gradually receded into something more manageable. I still loved my family. I still harbored a faint, enduring hope that someday we might find our way back to each other. But I no longer felt solely responsible for making that happen, especially at the grievous expense of my own well-being. My 33rd birthday arrived in September, and I celebrated it by embarking on a solo trip to Portland, Oregon. I had always yearned to visit, and now, unburdened by family obligations siphoning away my vacation budget, I could finally afford to explore somewhere new. I wandered through charming bookstores and cozy coffee shops, hiked the verdant trails of Forest Park, and savored incredible food. I rang in my birthday at a vibrant rooftop bar, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, surrounded by strangers, yet feeling more whole, more authentically myself, than I had in years. One night during that trip, nestled in my hotel room, I wrote a heartfelt letter to my younger self. I told her, explicitly, that she was worthy of love and respect. I told her that being helpful and generous were beautiful, commendable qualities, but not when they came at the devastating cost of her own dignity. I told her that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, and that the people who truly loved her would respect those boundaries, rather than rage against them. When I returned home from Portland, I discovered a card in my mailbox. It was from Olivia, my 10-year-old niece. She had carefully drawn a picture of us together at Disney World, a nostalgic echo from when I had first begun funding those family trips. At the bottom, in her earnest, careful handwriting, she had penned, "I miss you and hope you come back soon." I cried for an hour after reading that card. Then, I placed it reverently in a special box where I kept meaningful mementos, and tried to hold on to the fragile hope that someday, when those children were older, they would truly understand. The holidays approached once more, and I braced myself for whatever emotional chaos they might bring. My mother reached out in early December, her tone softer, more tentative, than it had been all year. She confessed she missed me and wanted me to come to Christmas dinner. She promised that Danielle would be civil, and that no one would bring up the trip incident. I asked my mother, point blank, if she had truly considered why I cancelled the trip in the first place. There was a long, uncharacteristic pause before she answered. She admitted that she'd been reflecting on things, and could now see how the situation might have seemed unfair from my perspective. It wasn't the full, unequivocal acknowledgement I desperately needed, but it was, undeniably, more than I had ever expected. I told her I would think about Christmas. In the end, I decided not to go, not out of stubbornness or a lingering grudge, but because I knew, deep within my bones, that I wasn't truly ready. Walking into that house, confronting Danielle's simmering resentment and my parents' complicated, unresolved feelings, would simply undo months of painstakingly hard-won healing. Maybe next year, I told myself, a whisper of hope. Maybe by then, we'll all have grown enough to try again. I spent Christmas with Melanie and her wonderful family instead. They welcomed me warmly, embraced me like one of their own, and in doing so, reminded me what truly healthy family dynamics could look like. Melanie's mother asked about my pottery, her interest genuinely engaged. Her father challenged me to a board game, laughing heartily when I beat him. Her younger brother playfully teased me about my hiking obsession and promised to join me on a trail in the spring. This New Year's Eve, precisely 1 full year after everything irrevocably fell apart, I stood on my balcony at midnight and watched distant fireworks paint shimmering streaks across the Minneapolis skyline. I reflected on the woman I was 12 months ago, the woman who had always, instinctively, put others first, relegating her own needs to a distant secondary position. I thought about the $12,000 I'd lost, a significant sum that still, occasionally, made me wince with a phantom pain. I thought about my sister and my parents, and my nieces and nephews, all the intricate, complicated threads of love and disappointment that wove the fabric of my family. But most of all, I thought about what I had gained. I gained my self-respect, a foundation upon which to build a stronger self. I gained unwavering clarity about my inherent worth. I gained the profound understanding that true generosity should emanate from joy, not suffocating obligation, and that people who genuinely appreciate you will never make you feel guilty for harboring needs of your own. I gained an entire year of exponential growth and healing, a journey that would have been utterly impossible if I had spent another New Year's Eve babysitting, while my sister luxuriated in a romantic dinner on my dime. Danielle still hasn't spoken to me. My parents maintain an uneasy truce, reaching out occasionally, but never quite addressing the core, festering issues. Marcus sporadically sends me updates about the children every few months, brief, thoughtful notes about report cards and basketball games, reassuring me they are well, without demanding an immediate response. I honestly don't know what the future holds for my family. I don't know if Danielle will ever soften enough to engage in a real, honest conversation with me. I don't know if my parents will ever fully comprehend the fundamental reasons behind my actions. I don't know if those children will grow up believing their aunt abandoned them, or if they'll eventually, truly, learn the truth. What I do know, with an absolute certainty that grounds me, is that I made the right choice. For years I allowed myself to be used because I tragically confused obligation with love, and misplaced generosity with self-worth. I foolishly believed that if I gave enough, helped enough, sacrificed enough, I would finally earn the love and respect I so desperately craved from my family. Instead, I merely taught them that my boundaries were arbitrary, and my feelings were negotiable. Canceling that trip was the single most expensive thing I have ever done. It was also, unequivocally, the most valuable. If you are reading this, and you see a reflection of yourself in my story, if you are the family member who perpetually gives while everyone else takes, if you have been guilt-tripped into believing that your needs matter less than everyone else's, I want you to understand something profoundly important. You deserve better. You deserve to be appreciated, not exploited. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect, on reciprocal kindness, not on a one-sided, draining obligation. Setting boundaries might cost you money. It might cost you relationships you once desperately clung to. It might even cost you the illusion of family harmony, an illusion you've been tirelessly maintaining for years. But what you will gain in return is something no amount of money can ever buy. You'll gain yourself. And that, I promise you, is worth everything.